What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here, and I wanted to talk about a little bit the new stat blocks that have been dropped. Now, we've seen a handful of 2024 stat blocks in full in the form of various one-shots and things that have been released from Wizards of the Coast. Now, several others of my fellow D&D YouTube brethren have done videos covering 2024 stat blocks. I am not going to cover those and talk about those here, as I'd rather you just go watch their videos. There's a handful of them out there. I think Pointy Hat has one, Pack Tactics, Dungeon Dad, D4, Dungeon Dudes. A handful of these folks all have done previews of the new monsters in, a monster or series of monsters from the new 2024 Monster Manual. I'm not going to take away from their videos. You want to go watch them, go and learn about it, go watch their videos. But Wizards of the Coast have released three or four official portions of a stat block, not the entire stat block for everything, as well as two that I found were on Reddit that I think were given to sort of news article websites. So we're going to go over those, talk about them, and the ones that we do have a 2014 equivalent of, we're going to go ahead and do a side-by-side comparison and see the differences. However, we are going to jump in and start with two of the brand new stat blocks that did not exist in 2014. Now, I covered these already on my live stream from yesterday, which I'll remind you that the D&D team is doing two brand new premiere videos a week. Yesterday, they premiered a video talking all about, with Todd Kenrick interviewing Jeremy Crawford, talking about the undead monsters, the new undead monsters in the 2024 Monster Manual. Tomorrow will be monstrosities, and I will be covering that in the form of a live stream as well. And then we don't know what it is, but next week there'll likely be two more on Tuesday and Thursday, and so on and so forth until the 2024 Monster Manual is officially released. So that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the first of the brand new stat blocks that we're seeing here, and that is the Vampire Familiar, although you should like and subscribe to the channel and do all those things. All right, so here it is, the Vampire Familiar. Now, this is not a vampire proper, right? This is literally, think like a Renfield type, one of this sort of thralls, if you will, of a vampire, someone who has not officially been gifted on life from their vampire master. They are just essentially like an improved, almost like a Find Familiar style familiar for the vampire. So they are still a humanoid, because that is, again, one of the requirements that you need to be to contract vampirism, is you have to be a humanoid and alive. Resistance to necrotic damage, immunity to charm, which I feel like means we're going to see those obviously transferred over to the vampire proper, resistance to necrotic damage, and again, immunity to the charmed condition. You can see the gear section here. This is something new for the 2024 Monster Manual, where you'll see if creatures have specific items worth mentioning, they'll be called out here in their gear section of their stat block. And it has vampiric connection. While the vampire and familiar master are on the same plane of existence, the vampire can communicate with the familiar telepathically, and the vampire can perceive through the familiar's senses. So again, very similar, as mentioned, to the Find Familiar spell, although with a significantly larger range. And this way, obviously, it doesn't seem like you are fully dominated necessarily by the vampire. Now, obviously, they are, I think, considered basically charmed or immune to charm from other creatures except for the vampiric master, but they can communicate with you and then obviously see what you're seeing. So going against the will of your vampire master may work out pretty negatively for you, but they can also send you to go about and do various things while they're locked away during daylight hours. They have multi-attack, two uses of their Umbral Dagger attack, which does a d4 plus 3 piercing damage plus an additional 3d4 necrotic. Now, this is not a function of the dagger. It's not a magical dagger. This is a function of the character's stat block. And if the target is reduced to 0 hit points by this attack, the target becomes stable, but has the poisoned condition for 1 hour. While it has the poisoned condition, the target has the paralyzed condition. And then as a bonus action, the familiar can take the dash or disengage action. Now, something that's worth considering here is this kind of taps into more what we've seen from a handful of different features in animal stat blocks as well as summoning stat blocks, which is, I feel like, were this creature created in 2014, they would have stabbed you for the damage, and then you would have probably had to make like a Constitution saving throw to see if you would be poisoned or something like that. We are seemingly getting away from that in 2024, where if something requires you, if there's a degree of uncertainty, right, like they either need to hit you or they need to make a saving throw, it's one or the other, not both. I think this is present in a handful of examples. Like if a creature has a poison, it's not, it rolls to hit you with its like poison stinger attack, and then you make a Constitution saving throw to see if you are affected by the poison. If you are hit with it, you then automatically take that poison damage. I think we also see this in things like the Ray of Sickness spell, where if you fire the Ray of Sickness spell in 2014, it's like you got to hit them first, and then they make a con save to see if they're poisoned. Now it's like if I hit you with this spell, you are poisoned. And that's kind of what we're seeing here with this Umbral Dagger. If you're dropped to 0 hit points, there is no saving throw. You are stable and poisoned for an hour. Also worth noting with this particular feature, even if you are healed back up to full, you are still poisoned, therefore paralyzed. The poisoned condition is the qualifier here, not being reduced to 0 hit points. So not only will you need to heal them, you'll also need to have some sort of condition cleanse, whether that's a paladin or lay on hands or what, or restoration or something. So you could be fully conscious, fully healed to full, and still be stuck in paralysis for an hour until that poison condition can be cleansed from you. Pretty powerful in the form of this being, again, just a familiar for a greater vampire. The one that was just released yesterday also was this Haunting Revenant. They talked about this pretty extensively in the video. This is essentially when the spirit, the vengeance spirit of a revenant, misses its mark when it's returning to the body it's supposed to go to, and essentially ends up in a object, in this case looking like a house, where it's literally a haunted house. But it's also odd choice too, because if they're really lying, like, this feels more like it should be a poltergeist to me, not a haunting revenant, because this is essentially a spirit of vengeance that was brought back for one reason or another with the purpose of doing the vengeance, right? Whatever the vengeance is. And instead it hit a house, so now you have a vengeance house. But it has a 30-foot movement speed, which is wild in this image. It's literally a building. But, like, now a building is hunting down. Like, if it's, oh, this person killed me and wronged me, or wronged me in some way, and now my vengeance spirit has brought me back to track down this individual to get vengeance and kill them, or whatever it might be. And instead, now I'm a walking house. So, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be a house. This is just the imagery that they're showing here, but let's take a look. Resistance to necrotic and psychic damage, immunity to poison damage, and then a ton of condition immunities, right? Charmed, exhausted, frightened, grappled, paralyzed, petrified, poison, prone, restrained, and unconscious. I'd love to see this compared to the base Revenant to see if it has the same immunities as the base Revenant has, or does it just get a lot of these because it's literally an object? It also has True Sight, this Revenant. It has the Haunted Zone, Constitution saving throw, DC 17. Any creature that casts a spell while inside the Revenant's space needs to make that con save. If a failure, the spell fails and is wasted. So the Haunting Revenant Evil Haunted House has a better counterspell than players do in 2024, because if you try to cast a spell inside it and fail, not only does the spell not go off, the slot is also wasted, which is better than, again, 2024 counterspell. And it has Undead Restoration, again, similar to all Revenants. If it dies, it revives 24 hours later unless the spell, evil or good, is cast on its remains. If it revives, it animates another gargantuan object or structure elsewhere on the same plane of existence. It now looks different, but uses the same stat block. Okay, so it won't come back into the same house. It will pick something else. And it can make 2 object slam attacks and uses invitation. So object slam is its advantage if you're inside its space, like inside the house. Otherwise, it has a range of 10 feet, or it can be done at range, does 5d8 plus 5 bludgeoning damage. And then invitation is a charisma saving throw, DC 17, and a 60-foot cone. If the target fails that saving throw, they are teleported into the Revenant's space and swallowed. A swallowed creature has total cover against attacks and other effects outside the revenant. While the revenant has hit points, a swallowed creature can leave the revenant's space only by using magic that enables planar travel, such as plane shift. This thing is absolutely terrifying. It can 60-foot cone charisma save, teleport you and your party inside it, which you cannot leave. And if you have party members outside, they can't see you because you have total cover to be able to try to get you back out. Planar travel is your only means of escape. And then if you're inside it, it can deal, it can attack you with advantage and again, on a hit is dealing 5d8 plus 5 bludgeoning damage. Not only that, if you try to do your planar travel spell, you still have to make a Constitution saving throw and potentially waste that spell slot. If you fail, you'll be stuck inside, which is just absolutely wild. All right, the last one that we got from WotC here was this seemingly about half of an ancient gold dragon stat block. We notice that it is half because it doesn't list the spellcasting the dragon has. It also doesn't list weakening breath. But we can see a variety of things here. One thing of note that I think is interesting is a plus 16 on its initiative roll, which is pretty nuts, and a ton of hit points, 546. It has legendary resistances 4 or 5 times a day in its lair, and then on its turn, similar to what we saw in the ancient green dragon stat block, it has a rend attack in favor of bite, claw, or tail. They seem to have all just been condensed down to a rend attack that does slashing damage in this case, plus additional fire damage. It can also replace one of its attacks with either its spellcasting feature, casting Guiding Bolt at level 4, which we now know one of the spells that it does have access to is Guiding Bolt, or use its Weakening Breath, which is in a separate ability from its Fire Breath, as we can see here, which is a 90-foot cone, 13d10 fire damage. So it could do the Fire Breath in a big kind of AoE to try to hit you with some fire damage, or rend attacks and then potentially replace a rend attack with a Weakening Breath, and then potentially replace a different one, let's say, with Guiding Bolt. And all we know is it is a DC 24 on its spell saves and things. We don't know what its attack roll is currently. But all we know, obviously, is Guiding Bolt is one of them. It does have a 30 strength, though, which is pretty wild. If we were to take a look at the existing Ancient Gold Dragon, it does still have, actually, a lot of this is a lot more similar than I thought. Same AC, same hit points. Yeah, actually, a lot of this is the same. More legendary resistance. Again, we had this, as you can see, Bite, Claw, and Tail have been condensed down to a rend attack. That damage has been dropped from 2d10 to 2d8, but they've tacked on an additional 2d8 fire damage to it. No notice of Frightful Presence as it stands currently. It is a DC 24 90-foot cone, 13d10 fire damage. That all remains the same. And then again, they did not have spellcasting. So I'm assuming Change Shape is still there, but we don't know. We also don't know what its Weakening Breath, if it's any different than it was here. And again, we still don't know what kind of legendary action situation we're dealing with. But surprisingly, a lot of the stuff is almost exactly the same. It does still seemingly have proficiency in most of the same saving throws, although its Charisma saving throw was a 16. It is now a 9. Its Constitution saving throw was a 16. Is also now down to a 9. It looks like it lost proficiency in most saving throws, actually. Dex was plus 9. Wisdom was plus 10. Oh, those are the same. So it lost its proficiency seemingly in Constitution and Charisma. But other than that, most of the dragon here seems the same, other than the additional legendary resistance and the condensing of the attacks down to rend, and obviously the spell casting, but we don't know what that is right now. So, and the reach is 15 feet. Yeah, that's the same too. They kept the reach of the bite attack. So, lastly, we had here over on Reddit were these two. Where's the Gargoyle on the left and the gelatinous cube here on the right. We can see a little bit more of these, as these are not just the stat block. They actually do provide us some of the information as far as, background information. So we have the Gargoyle sculpture here. You can see, again, habitats listed, and then treasure is any. Again, this could say, if it was something a little bit more specific, something along the lines of like armaments, implements, relics or arcane based on the magic item tables that we have in the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide. And again, what could the gargoyle sculpture be about, as well as different options for how it could camouflage itself. So first up, we have our gargoyle. We have our gargoyle over here. More hit points, jumped up from 52 to 67. Same sort of speeds here. We have, looks like, expertise in stealth, giving it a +4. Immunity to poison, exhaustion, petrified, and the poisoned condition. Little nitpick of mine, I don't like that it has immunities are lumped into a singular line. In 2014, it would say, damage immunity and condition immunity. I think that's a little bit cleaner. There basically is a semicolon separating damage immunities from condition immunities, because you'll see it says poison and poisoned. I don't particularly like that. I think that's definitely an easy way to potentially trip up newer players, but either way. It has flyby, which I don't believe it had previously, and then it makes 2 claw attacks that deal 2d4 +2 damage. If we take a look at our other gargoyle here, as mentioned, it used to have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing from normal or non-magical attacks that aren't adamantine. That has been ditched completely in favor of just poison immunity. And then again, the exhaustion, petrified, and poisoned conditions, those are still there. It does not have false appearance anymore, which makes it indistinguishable from an inanimate object. Instead, it just has that expertise in a +4 in stealth. I would argue, personally, that false appearance is much stronger as an ability in that you can't tell what it is. Whereas now it has to make a stealth check in theory. Having a +4 is nice, but it doesn't guarantee that you won't be found, which is interesting. It lost its damage resistance. It feels like it should probably still retain those, given the fact that it is literally made out of stone. But either way, and then it just has its multi-attack now. It used to have a bite and a claw attack, which each did a d6 +2, which has been shifted in favor of 2 claw attacks that do 2d4 +2. So potentially more damage overall on the high end and a higher damage floor. And then again, it does have flyby now, so it can fly in, makes attacks, and leave with a little bit more HP as well. And then lastly here we have the gelatinous cube, which has a little bit of what you could find inside it as this d6 table, which is kind of wild. Also, it would be crazy to have a chess or recently trapped mimic inside the gelatinous cube, which would be nuts. To be dealing with a gelatinous cube and a mimic inside it, that would be a wild experience. So first up here we have, still AC of 6, 63 hit points, immunity to acid, and a bunch of conditions here: blinded, charmed, deafened, exhausted, frightened, prone, blind sight of 60 feet. We have Ooze Cube as a trait here. It fills its entire space and is transparent. Other creatures can enter that space, but a creature that does so is subjected to the cube's engulf and has disadvantage on the saving throw. Creatures inside the cube have total cover, and the cube can hold 1 large creature or up to 4 medium or small creatures inside it at a time. As an action, a creature within 5 feet of the cube can pull a creature or object out if it makes a DC 12 athletics check, but the puller takes 3d6 acid damage. It is also transparent, even in plain sight. You need to succeed on a DC 15 perception check to witness that the cube is there. Has a 15-foot movement speed. I don't remember if it was that high before. It has its pseudopod attacks, which do 3d6 +2 acid damage. And then it has its engulf ability, where it moves up to its speed without provoking attacks of opportunity. The cube can move through spaces of larger, smaller creatures. They need to make a dexterity saving throw DC 12. Each creature whose space the cube enters for the first time during this movement. On a failure, they're going to take 3d6 acid damage and are engulfed. While engulfed, they can't cast spells with a verbal component, are restrained, and take 3d6 acid damage at the start of each of the cube's turn. An engulfed target can try to escape by making a DC 12 athletics check. On a success, they escape and enter the nearest space that's unoccupied. On a failure, they take On a successful check, the target escapes and enters the nearest unoccupied space. Success, this is so written so poorly. Success, half damage, and the target moves to an unoccupied space within 5 feet. Why wouldn't you combine that terminology? I don't know. If there's no unoccupied space, this target fails the save instead. Okay. Why wouldn't you put that in? It just doesn't. The wording just doesn't. I know I'm blocking it with my camera here, but the wording just seems odd to me. Let me go ahead and move myself up a little bit so you can see. But when the cube moves, the engulfed target moves with it, and engulfed target can try to escape by making an action. Okay. So I guess it's only you can attempt to make that check if it's moving, I guess. An engulfed target can try to escape by taking an action to make a DC 12 athletics check. On a successful check, the target escapes and enters the nearest unoccupied space. So that's all if you fail. If you succeed, you only take half of the acid damage and move to an unoccupied space within 5 feet. I'm not entirely sure if you get to make an engulfed check, an athletic check every turn to attempt to escape, or only when it moves. It's kind of hard to tell. I just don't like the organization of that stat block particularly. But let's take a look and compare it to its earlier form. So, first of all, hit point decrease. Used to have 84 hit points. We are now down to 63. Still has that blind sight. Ooze Cube is still the name of the ability here. It used to be a DC 12 strength check, which meant it would not benefit from your proficiency in athletics. This also seems to be something we're seeing across the board with various, anything that had a check before is now a specific kind of check. If it was a spell, if it was an ability that forced you to make a strength check, a wisdom check, intelligence check, those have now been replaced with like perception check, athletics check, whatever the case may be. You're now making skill checks as opposed to just base level checks, which does mean the chance of you escaping or getting out of some of these things is significantly stronger, right? Even if you have a pretty low strength, if you had to make a strength check where your strength was maybe 0, you'd be rolling a d20 plus nothing. But maybe through one way or another, you do have proficiency in athletics, which might be, your proficiency bonus maybe say is a 3, which meant now that roll is a d20 plus 3. The chance of you escaping is significantly higher. Did the puller take acid damage? Yeah, and the creature taking the attempt takes acid damage. Still the same check here. The pseudopod looks like it does a little bit more damage in 3d6 plus 2 acid damage. And then engulf again. While doing so, it moves its speed. Now it moves its speed without provoking attacks of opportunity. That's a huge change for it. Again, it can move through. Whenever the cube enters a creature's space, it must make a dexterity saving throw, DC 12. On a success, the creature can choose to be pushed 5 feet back or to the side of the cube. On a failed save, the creature enters the cube, takes 3d6 acid damage, and is engulfed. The engulfed creature can't breathe and is restrained. Oh, see, it used to take 6d6 acid damage at the start of the cube's turn. It's now only 3d6 acid damage at the start of the turn. However, it does specify that you cannot cast spells with a verbal component, whereas here you technically could. Suffocation, I don't believe, specifically states you can't cast verbal component spells. It might have, but it says here you can't breathe and are restrained. Here it officially states you are suffocating. So like I guess maybe it's can't breathe. I guess the difference is suffocation is like you're immediately suffering the suffocation effects, whereas you can't breathe, you're holding your breath, maybe. I don't know. But now this is you immediately start suffocating. You can't cast verbal component spells, and you are restrained. So that's, I feel like the new version is significantly stronger in that effect because you're not like teleporting out of this cube with a verbal component teleportation spell. You're stuck in here. You are suffering the effects of suffocation, and you are restrained. You're only taking 3d6 acid damage at the start of your turn as opposed to 6d6 acid damage, which is a pretty significant amount. And it does here say an engulfed creature can try to escape by taking an action to make a DC 12 strength check. Whereas again, now it is a DC 12 strength athletics check. So the chance of you escaping is a little bit higher. Interesting changes to the gelatinous cube, I think, for sure. having its hit points overall lowered, its persistent acid damage lowered overall. But a little more damage on the pseudopod side of things, and no opportunity attacks when it moves, which is pretty useful, obviously, if you're just trying to like roll through things. Um, so I don't know. Let me know your thoughts and opinions on what we've seen so far. If history dictates, tomorrow being a video that they're going to release covering monstrosities, they'll probably release at least one portion or an entirety of a monster stat block tomorrow. We'll obviously review that during the live stream, but also we can, kind of compile it and make a separate video about it as well. But we've had several released thus far, so I thought it would be better to just kind of condense those down into their own video, talk a little bit about it. So let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.